Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson. It is Valentine's Day week, and you are going to love this episode. Adam Cesare is here to talk about his books, including the Clown in a Cornfield series and Influencer, and to talk about our first Wes Craven installment of this show. We're going to talk about Wes Craven's New Nightmare. It's going to get a little crazy. Adam and I always have fun chatting, and this was a blast. I hope you enjoy it. Before we head to that, though, I did want to recommend a couple of things for y'all. First up, on the book side, I'm going to go nonfiction again. I've been reading nonfiction. Nonfiction helps me relax in a way that fiction does not, especially horror fiction. So I like to balance out fiction and nonfiction while reading. And lately, I have been into a book called The Unidentified by Colin Dickey, who also wrote the excellent Ghostland, which is a history of haunted locations in America. The Unidentified takes that same sort of scholarly approach to weird occurrences in the world and trains it on everything from cryptids to UFOs to how we got all of these Atlantean conspiracy theories and things like that, where they all come from, what movements, philosophical and religious movements and things like that inspired all of that stuff. So if you love cryptids, if you love lost city legends and weird stuff like that, if you love UFOs, definitely check out The Unidentified. It is fantastic. On the film side, I want to recommend Heart Eyes, the new slasher film directed by Josh Rubin. I love Josh's work. If you've ever seen Scare Me or Werewolves Within, that was Josh. Josh is a great horror filmmaker, and he teamed up with two other great horror filmmakers, Christopher Landon and Michael Kennedy, the people behind stuff like Happy Death Day and Freaky and movies like that, to make this Valentine's Day slasher about a killer who is called Heart Eyes because guess what? He wears a mask with hearts for eyes. It is funny. It is violent. It is romantic, like genuinely romantic in a rom-com way that makes it very fun to watch. Olivia Holt and Mason Gooding are the two leads. They're wonderful in it. I just had so much fun watching this film, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's in theaters now. Go watch Hard Eyes. You're going to have a great time. That does it for recommendations this week. Let's head over to our very fun interview with Adam Cesare. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is one of my favorites, friend of the show, even though he hasn't been on the show yet. He is the Bram Stoker award-winning author of books like Clown in a Cornfield, Clown in a Cornfield 2, Friendo Lives, Clown in a Cornfield 3, The Church of Friendo, and Influencer. Coming up next, you will be able to see Friendo and all of his victims in the Clown in a Cornfield movie, which will have its world premiere at South by Southwest before hitting theaters in May. Adam Cesare, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. May 9th, everyone. Go bring all your friendos. That's my tagline. That is not IFC, RLJE, and Shudder's tagline, but I think it's a pretty good tagline. Bring your friendos.
Bring your friendos.
And just to clarify what Matthew said, I am not an influencer. I wrote a book named Influencer, and you should go get it in paper.
He wrote, yes, he is the author.
I realized after naming that book, which I fought really hard for the name Influencer. I thought it was a good title. There's a movie named Influencer, which I constantly have to be like, people are like, does this have anything to do with that? And I was like, they'll read the description and be like, is this the same as that movie? I'm like, that movie is set in Bali. Like, this is definitely not the same. And then the second thing is that I'm on promo emails and stuff like that, getting referred to as an influencer. And I'm like, no, stop. That's not it. It's about a serial killing sociopathic Instagram poet. Like that's the book. I'm not.
Yes. Adam is the author of the book Influencer, separate from the Shudder original movie Influencer, which is about a totally different thing. But while we're on the subject, I feel like Influencer is a little bit maybe overshadowed by the clown books because they've blown up so much. So if you wouldn't mind giving our listeners kind of the quick pitch of what Influencer is, what they can expect from it.
Influencer kind of is born out of, I do like, I do an okay amount of press for like the clown books. And I'm usually talking to people. I'm usually talking to like horror movie people. I'm not talking to horror book people. And I'm usually talking, and when I talk to book people even, I'm talking to people who are like adult horror people. And they're always surprised by the violence in the clown books. And they're always surprised by like, what you can quote unquote get away with. And I think Influencer, in some ways, is me being like, look, these are stories about teenagers, and they're stories about teenagers' contemporary fears, and there is no content rating on them. So I'm going to write the most kind of extreme YA book and just kind of push that sense of there is no rating in YA, as long as you are true to your characters and as long as you are true to your intended audience. Influencer is the kind of YA book I would have read as like a teenager that got into Jack Ketchum pretty early. You know what I mean? So it is about a sociopathic Instagram poet who thinks he is the next coming of Charles Manson, and the one girl at school who's going to try to stop him. And it switches back and forth between their perspectives. It's written first person present tense, but with two kind of dueling perspectives. So we get these kind of almost Patrick Bateman-esque chapters when we're in the killer's perspective, and then we get this kind of wallflower, unlikely final girl perspective, which I like. I like too. I like there's such a move in modern horror and in slashers. Even though this book's not a slasher, I'm kind of known for slasher stuff. Like there's this move to like make every final girl into Sarah Connor, and I just didn't want to do that. I already have Quinn Maybrook in the Clown and the Cornfield books. I wanted to write a very realistic character, a character that has all the same kind of neuroses and social anxiety and stuff like that I do. And it's like, well, what if they were the only person that could like take down a serial killer? Like, what would happen? Like, that's the pitch. But I'm very, very happy with it. It started out life as an Audible original. It was narrated by Christopher Briney and Isabella Merced, were like the two main narrators. And my main deal with Audible, my main like thing when I went in to talk to Audible, which is like, you're getting a meeting with Amazon, and they're like, they got the money, they got everything. And the first question I asked was like, if we do this, can we still do a paperback? And they were like, no one ever asked us that. Why would you ask us that? And I'm like, I don't want to write a book and have it not exist as a book, So the paperback just at the end of last year came out with Union Square Books, and I think it's just a really good book. I think it's my best. That and Clown 3 are probably my best books. So.
Yeah, and speaking of Clown 3, one of the things I love about the Clown books, without giving too much away for anyone who hasn't, I'm being careful about spoilers with the Clown books because the movie is going to come out, and that's going to drive more people to start these books from the beginning, which you absolutely should. They're all a blast. One of the things I love about these books is how much ambition there is in terms of evolving the story. Because the first one is very much a slasher. Like, you're gonna get what the title promises. Like, it's a clown mask killer, like, and teens trying to survive this. And then in book 2, you get into this sort of conspiracy thriller vein, along with the slasher stuff. And then book 3 verges into like folk horror and bigger, darker, more kind of apocalyptic existential stuff. Do you sit down with each of these books? Because I know you see them more as like a slasher series in the movie vein of like, you're just going to keep going as long as you have good ideas. Do you sit down before? Do you have like a list of like, okay, this is going to be the conspiracy thriller book. This is going to be the folk horror book. This is going to be the I don't know.
That's a good question. It's almost like I don't have a list. But I do very deliberately, when I sit down and I'm like, okay, this is going to be this. Like I almost come up with like a story, like because each one for some more than others, but like each book has an epilogue that kind of at least hints at what turn the story is going to take. And in the first book, I didn't think there was going to be a sequel because I kind of was like, I was an indie author for 10 years before the first book came out. And I was kind of like, I'm never getting another at bat at like a hardcover original, thing. And so I ended the book with this little kind of tease for sequel. This is like kind of the end question mark epilogue that so many people got pissed off at, that were like, this is a blatant, cliffhanger for a sequel. And it's funny because it's just a sequel I never intended to write. I never thought there would be a sequel. I just did it because that's the way you end slasher stories like that. Like you said, the first one plays within the slasher structure pretty rigidly. But then the second book and the third book, with each epilogue, I've kind of been like, well, this is where the story is going to go. And then I sit down when it's, when Harper gives the green light and the thumbs up that I'm allowed to do another one. The sales justify doing another one. I just sit down and that's when I figure out it is very deliberate. Like what are the vibes going to be? And on Twitter, I've like put up like cinematic mood boards. I started doing them for the third one, and I just did one for this. I'm way out of line here because the book hasn't officially been announced yet. But I just did a cinematic mood board for the fourth one, and it's really that idea of like, I don't want them to feel the same. Really don't want them to feel the same, and I almost want them, like, even though people ask me if like, oh, are they anthologies? And like, no, you'd be hopelessly lost if you picked up Clown 3 and you hadn't read the first two. But there's this like thematic standaloneness, like each one has, I want each one to have a feeling of a different kind of story, and usually a story I like a lot. So with three's a weird one because there are those folk horror vibes, but three is a split narrative where the two narratives do at a certain point interact in a way that you're not expecting. But it has two vibes. Like it has like 70s road revenge vibes. Like it has like Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry, and Convoy. It has like these kind of almost buddy mismatched group on the road vibes, and then it has like The Witch and Wicker Man and Blood on Satan's Claw and all that, and then eventually they all come together. And the hard part of that is you also want them still to feel like a Clown in the Cornfield book. Like you still want them to be a piece of this series and not feel like it's too radical a turn, which I feel very lucky in the first three that I think it pretty much did it, and I'm going to try to do it again, as you said, as many times as possible. People now that there's just a third one out, horror fans and especially book people are so trained to look at three books and group them and just say trilogy.
Say trilogy.
And I get myself in trouble because I feel like an a-hole because I keep, like, every time someone tags me, I say like, not a trilogy. I say, and they think I'm yelling at them, and I'm like, I'm not yelling at you. I'm just like teasing another book. Like I just don't want to. I think once we get to 4, people will stop saying trilogy or they'll say quadrilogy. But yeah, I don't, especially with the way 3 ends and the epilogue in 3. It's clear that I'm gunning for more. I love horror trilogies, but we wouldn't be talking about the movie we're talking about today if we stopped at Dream Warriors. So,
Yeah. We have to get to Clown in the Cornfield 8, Friendo Takes Manhattan. We have to do that at some point. Yeah.
I get that one a lot. I get In Space a lot. And I had a great concept for Space. But it's like the kind of the reality of the world like takes the wind out of my sails sometimes. Cause like my concept for Space, not saying I'll never ever do Space, but my concept for Space was like a SpaceX, like Elon Musk type thing. But it's not fun anymore. You know what I mean? It's like now like reality's gotten too kooky that like my kooky, based on reality slasher stories aren't even like steals their thunder.
I'm not gonna talk about it on air because I don't want anybody to I don't want to plant seeds of my ideas and other people's ideas, but remind me to tell you I had a similar thing with a thing I'm working on right now. That
Awesome.
It's just like, man, the world gets too crazy too fast. What do you do anymore?
Yeah.
So as we mentioned, the Clown in a Cornfield movie, very highly anticipated.
Eli Craig, who did Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, produced by Temple Hill, who recently did the Smile movies. They're known for their YA adaptations. Like the company started because of the success of Twilight. And they did Maze Runner and The Hate U Give. They've done like a lot of great YA adaptations, but then like right before they started doing the clown movie, they got these horror hits with Smile 2 is probably one of my favorite movies last year.
Oh,
I
it's so
absolutely
fun.
love it.
Yeah.
And I'm well. Here's where I get myself in a little trouble. The first one's great. It's the Ring plus It Follows, and that's like kind of what it says on the tin. It's just that. And 2 was so surprising to me and so good and so much of a level up to me. Like it's one of those people say they're like, there's no sequels that's better than the original, and then they say the same 3 ones that I always marginal to me. Like I think like Final Destination 2 and like Smile 2 are one of the actual only ones that are better to me
Yeah.
than the
Yeah.
original. And I think Smile 2 is so good. But that's a real tangent. What were we gonna say? What were we talking about?
No, I was just going to mention it's where you're getting a South by Southwest premiere, which is amazing.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
awesome.
you have a theatrical release as we start to head into the summer movie season.
May
And
9th. Yeah.
yeah, which
It's gonna
is
be. I'm so excited. We're like a summer movie. I don't know. They seem to have RLJE Films and Shutter, who are an IFC offshoots that are doing this, seem to have a world of faith in the movie. And I have a little preview of like the stuff they're going to end up being doing to promote it, and it's really cool. It's a really really neat thing.
if
Yeah.
I'm not technically an influencer, I'm a critic, but I'm going to say it on air. If they make friendo masks to give out to people, I want one. IFC.
I believe me. You're gonna get the second one off the production line because I'm gonna get the first one. But no, they're tired of me saying it already because I'm sure that was like the first thing that I brought up. We had like a general meeting and like 2 things that I brought up, and like one was a poster thing and one was well, you got to make masks. So like,
I have my little oddity mannequin head
nice. Yeah.
over my shoulder here that I got at South by last year, so I need Friendo to go with him. Um, but I was just very generally, I wanted to ask because it goes differently for every author. What has the adaptation process been like for you?
That's really good. I'm not hands off and I'm not disinterested. I'm very interested, but I'm also like, as a film fan and as someone that likes this stuff, I'm also very like, and someone who's like, I was like a film major, you know what I mean? Like, and I was like a film studies, film major guy. So I'm like, you know what? The French already like figured this out. Like, this is auteur theory, baby. Like, this is like Eli Craig's movie. So I remove myself, not completely, because they showed me the script and I had lots of nice meetings with Eli and I went to set. Like, so like I was like involved and they were very gracious in the level to which they involved me. But I also like, I wasn't like given no, you know what I mean? Like I think I gave 1 note. And it was a note that they took. So like I can say I'm one of the only authors, probably the only author that ever got 100% of his notes through on like a movie, like because it was just one. But like I'm pretty. I'm pretty anxious and excitable in every other way. But for this, I was pretty chill and I just had a lot of faith in them, and I was working closely with them, and just knew. And when they said Eli Craig, and I like Tucker and Dale so much that like even like people will see the movie and they're going to be like they're going to like it because it's a great movie, and they're also going to like it because fans of the book are going to like it because it used pretty closely to the book. But there's also like there's stuff that's just not the books. Like there's stuff that's just like even tonal stuff. Like it's Eli Craig who made Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. Like it's funnier than my books are. Like, which is, why would you hire him if you didn't want it to be? You know what I mean? Like, why would you have him make the movie if you didn't want it to be? Which is great. I got to sit back and watch it and enjoy it as a film and enjoy it. Like there's like 3 lines. There's like 3 like beats, and you could probably almost guess what they are when you see the movie. That I'm like, I should have done that. Which is like it's a good feeling. It's a good feeling, like in adaptation is like, yeah. So that's my. I had that. Maybe it's because I have such an online footprint and there's like hours of me talking on podcasts and videos and stuff like that, where I have to kind of have the courage of my convictions and like stick with the stuff I've said in the past. But like I truly do have that view towards adaptation. I had that view before I'd written any books to get adapted, and I have that view now that I've had a book adapted, where it's like, no, it should be its own thing, and it shouldn't ever be. There's people that require books be like slavish to the to the text. of the book. And it's like, well, what's the point of making a movie then? Because you just read the book. So that's always been my theory. And it's nice to kind of have it be bared out in practice too. It's nice to be like, well, look, I was right. Like when you like point to the movie. So that's other than that, like talking about like my experience and stuff like that, it was just really cool going to set. I'm a fanboy. I brought a copy of Will Sasso's in the movie. I brought a copy of Southland Tales with me. I brought two T-shirts. I wore the jeans the whole time that I wore onto the plane, and a phone charger. And the only other thing I brought was Southland Tales on Blu-ray. I just because I was like, maybe I'll get him to sign it, and I chickened out before I could, but it was still like, I'm a fanboy. I got to like talk to Kevin Durant and stuff like that. I love character actors and folks that I've seen in a lot of other movies. And the young cast is great. It's just good, and it was just a nice experience. I went up to set on the day. If people have read the book, there's a parade in the book. There's the Founders Day parade.
Yeah.
I planned my trip specifically because I have a young daughter, so I didn't want to be away for too long. But I planned my trip specifically to be like, I want to see that parade. And it was great. I walked around a town in Manitoba that they had like reskinned as Kettle Springs, like complete, like down to like the newspaper boxes were like Missouri Sentinel newspaper boxes, and the signs on all the stores have been switched over to like Kettle Springs Guns and Ammo and all this great stuff. It was awesome. It was like walking into the book.
That's amazing. So selfishly, because this is my show and I get to ask these things, you mentioned cinematic mood boards. You are someone who likes to delve into really sort of cruddy, obscure corners of horror, which I also do, but I feel like I don't do it as much as you do. So, and I also remembered, before I was going to talk to you, I remembered that you're actually in the acknowledgments for Stephen Graham Jones's Angel of Indian Lake as someone who helped him come up with chapter titles for all these slasher movies. So, as a slasher expert, as someone who watches these more obscure things, what's something you've seen recently that you feel like no one has seen that you think they should see?
Oh, no one has seen. No one has seen. Nothing has no one seen. Let me look at. I got to look at my Letterboxd. Sorry, I have, as I said, a young daughter, so I have like the memory of a goldfish. And when I get on podcasts and I get asked this stuff, I don't know. But let me scroll back just till I see some good stuff.
Hey, my son is almost 2. I'm with you. I understand.
Oh yeah. You're getting into the good stuff though. That's like when it's fun, I mean, we're always great, lovely miracles, but let's see. I watched. Here's one that's like why recommend this? But like you said, I usually watch a lot of like 60s, 70s, 80s stuff. But here's one from the early 2000s that I was getting a ton of the Terror Toons movies. Have you seen Terror Toons? Know the cover. I remember them from Blockbuster. You remember Blockbuster had like the previously viewed bins, and I would just go there whenever they were having those big sales, and I would just like, instead of renting movies, I would get movies for $5. And they did a ton of these. They had a deal with Artisan, and they had a deal with what's the other straight to video line that I'm thinking of? Not Mill Creek.
Anchor Bay.
Not Anchor Bay. Anchor Bay, because Anchor Bay would do like, I'm talking like original. Oh, Asylum is what I'm thinking of. Like Asylum.
There you go. Yeah.
And this was a brain damage film, which brain damage is suburban Sasquatch, and like it is like DTV usually, like or shot on video, SOV, like lowest of the low typically. And it has just such a great title. If people go, or such a great cover. If people go look up the Terror Toons movies, the first one has just this really these gross looking live action cartoons that like kill people in a house. Not to be confused with the Fred Olen Ray Evil Toons. Different, because they're not actual. They didn't have the budget to do actual animation, so it's like a lot of like clip art, and then like these guys in goofy masks. And I was getting all these Facebook ads and like Instagram ads for like the guy who made him. What's his name? Joe. Sorry. This is what happens when I'm not prepared, because you get a lot of me like reading stuff. Joe, what's his name? Joe Castro. I think like he's like putting all the movies out himself, because he made 4 of these things. Like Brink Stevens in like one of the sequels. Herschel Gordon Lewis is in one of the sequels. But the first one, it has this like quality to it that is uncanny in a way that's like, the first Sleepaway Camp's a little uncanny. It's like has that kind of like DIY. Like I watch a lot of this stuff, and I watch a lot of SOV movies, and a lot of it's just bad in the kind of pedestrian sense, or amateurish. I shouldn't say bad, because bad is pejorative, but like amateurish, or like DIY in like the same ways. But the Terror Tunes is so odd, and is so as edited and written and directed. A lot of it's on green screen, and the masks there's like a crazy doctor. He's like green, and he's got like these gross teeth. And there's like a gorilla guy, a purple gorilla guy who looks kind of like Magilla Gorilla. And they've escaped from the toon dimension, the cartoon dimension. And they're just killing these people for like no reason. And the DVD that they come on was authored by Satan himself and sent out to these houses. It's bizarre, and I sound like I have a head injury trying to describe it, and that's what the movie kind of makes you feel. So this is like you're asking me for like a deeper cut, and I'll just go like something I watched within the last couple weeks, and that's my recommendation, I guess, if we're going to say that. It's just because the sequels are odd in their own way, but nothing beats the first one's like 2002, I think. Just kind of a real time capsule of that time. All the actors have like a certain look to them. All like the guys have their hair like super gelled, and it's just like it reminds you that like, oh no, this stuff, even though it seems kind of contemporary, like this is 25 years ago. Like we're far away from this. Like, and you wouldn't make a movie like this, and a movie like this wouldn't get distribution and wouldn't be in every blockbuster in the country, the way it was then. So I just find it very interesting in a almost academic sense, and it's just weird and goofy, and the director is a special effects guy too. So the gore is like punches way above the weight class of like everything else in the movie. Like the gore is like pretty good and like really gross, and the masks are really cool, and then everything else is like is like I said, running at a different level. So it's very odd, ton of like weirdo slide whistle sound effects and stuff to add to like the tune-ness of it. We've talked way too long about Terror Tunes, but so let's move on from Terror Tunes. This is what you get when you ask a question like that. You get an answer where I can't quite articulate why I like the thing I like, but I still kind of liked it.
No, it's totally. This is exactly what I'm here for. I will definitely check that out when I get a chance. I'm in the middle of like a big David Lynch rewatch right now, but otherwise,
nice.
Yeah, I will give it a shot. But we're not going to talk about Terror Tunes or David Lynch anymore, because Adam has chosen one of the more interesting, ambitious slasher films ever made, Wes Craven's New Nightmare from 1994, written and directed by the master himself, Wes Craven. It is the, I guess, the seventh film in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and the final one in the main series.
Yeah.
And yet it's also sort of not the final one, because it's a meta movie. So Adam, since you brought this to us, would you explain to the people what New Nightmare is?
What New Nightmare is? So New Nightmare is a sequel, like you said, it's a meta sequel. It is a sequel where Wes Craven returns to the series he created after kind of taking a break. He made the first one, then they made a bunch of sequels without him, and then he comes back, and 10 years later, almost to the day, he makes this sequel where Heather Langenkamp plays herself, Robert Englund plays himself. Her real life is it's fascinating how close Craven used to like actual real life. Like Bob Shea from New Line like plays himself in the movie, and he's not just like a throwaway. He's not like just in it for like one scene. He's like in multiple scenes. He had to go to multiple locations to play Bob Shea in a movie. So it's way ahead of its time. meta movie about like they killed off Freddy and Freddy's dead, and the idea of Freddy Krueger has become so strong and so prevalent in the culture that like when Wes Craven made Nightmare on Elm Street, he tapped into something real and primordial and evil, but that thing wants to keep being Freddy Krueger. And basically Heather Langenkamp has to be Nancy in real life because she has a son. She has a young son who started to have these nightmares and kind of be terrorized by Freddy. And she has to. It's a little bit of like The Boy Who Cried Wolf because there's like no one's believing her. And then there is, and it just kind of slowly becomes a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. It's great. And the reason that I brought it up on this podcast is that it was very influential, not just I feel like to the genre, because I don't think correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know like the box office stuff. Like this movie wasn't that big a hit when it came out. I don't believe so.
It made back its money and then some, but it was I think it's the lowest grossing of any of the original.
Well, there you
Nightmare.
go. Yeah, there you go. And I remember what year did you say it was?
94.
Okay, so I was 6 years old. And in the movie, they talk about this idea that like Freddy Krueger is more like is just as recognizable as Santa Claus. Like all these people kind of keep, gaslighting Heather Langenkamp's character, who is Heather Langenkamp, and they're like, did you let your son watch? Why does your son know so much about Freddy Krueger? Did you let him watch your movies and stuff like that? And she's like, she gives this answer at one point where she's like, every kid knows who Freddy Krueger is. Which at the time this was made. Was very, very true and was very much true for me. It was the first Freddy I saw in the theater, the only one time-wise I would have been able to see in a theater. And I just begged my dad to bring me to this. I was 6 years old. This is not typically a movie you would bring a 6-year-old to, but we went to the Islip Triplex in Islip, New York. And I made it really far through the movie. I made it to the freeway scene, which is like an hour and 15 minutes. I clocked it when I was rewatching it. I made it to the freeway scene. And what's funny is that was the scene that was too scary for me. I had to run out, which when you watch it now is kind of like just, kind of like the action movie sequence. There's like a tanker like is almost hitting a kid and all this different stuff. And Freddy's like picking him up as he tries to run across an LA freeway. But I was fled from the theater an hour and 15 minutes into this movie. And then I saw it later on VHS. But just incredibly foundational to me in the way that it treats horror movies and the way that it talks about horror movies and the way that these are like, in some ways, these become myths bigger than themselves. And it's a self-perpetuating myth because Wes Craven's the one writing it and telling it and saying how great his initial idea was. So I just love it so much, and it's kind of seared in my memory because of that. And let's turn it over to the floor now. There's what the movie is and why I picked it, and then let's talk about a whole bunch of other stuff about it.
So yeah, just for listeners who may not have seen it, this movie is 30 years old now, so we are going to talk spoilers. So if you haven't seen New Nightmare, go watch it. It's great, and then come back and talk to us.
You do not need to see any of these sequels. You just need no. You need to know Nightmare on Elm Street, and then you can watch New Nightmare. You can just
if you and it really is. This is the amazing because you were talking about seeing this when you were 6, and I've talked about this on the show before, but it informs so much of how I came to horror. I was not allowed to watch horror films as a kid. I wasn't even allowed to watch sort of horror adjacent stuff. My dad was very protective and didn't want his kids freaking out over scary things. So I didn't really watch horror movies until I was like 15, 16. But that line about, and I'm I think a couple years older than Adam, but we're about the same age. And if you were that kid, like if you were born in the late 80s, early 90s, and you went to school, especially in the early 90s, it was true that every kid knew who Freddy Krueger was. Yeah. It was absolutely, I have vivid memories of being in like first grade and kids around me who like 6-year-old kids around me were talking about Freddy and Jason and Michael. And they knew all of these guys, and they knew the lore, and they knew the movies. And
where'd you grow up, if you don't mind me asking?
Central Texas.
So so on Long Island, New York. Couldn't get any culturally different than than these two places, and we were growing up around the same time. I will 100% vouch. Like, I just remember, and I know you're saying like Freddie and Jason and Michael, and you're putting them all in that thing. I think at this time there was, at least at my school, it was Freddie all the way. Like, the other ones were interesting, like, to everyone, but there was no everyone for Halloween was Freddy Krueger. Even if they hadn't seen one of the movies, like, it was that Freddy mania was incredible, and it was so culturally ubiquitous. And I just remember like swapping stories with kids, and like you would have that kid in school telling you about it, like you said, first grade, like about the Freddy he saw, and he's giving you a blow by blow of the movie. There's no way he didn't see a movie. It's not even true. Like, he didn't actually see, like it doesn't line up with any of the sequels, any of the movies. It's just that's how pernicious is, again, a bad, like a negative word. I don't mean it like that's how prevalent and ubiquitous Freddy was right around here. And the years leading up to this too, because it's like the longest break between a sequel is also between Freddy's Dead and New Nightmare, which, as far as things go, especially now, is not a long break at all. Like 10 years. You're talking about this movie is 30 years old, but when the movie came out, it was this it was ahead of its time in the way that it was a legacy sequel too, in a way, because they kill off Nancy in is it in 3? I can't remember. It's in one of the. It's in 3 or 4.
She's in 3.
But they kill her off. So like this is a way to bring Heather Langenkamp back, and it's there's this legacy sequelness to this, but it's only 10 years. Like all this entire franchise ran that long. Like, and you can't really count Freddy versus Jason. It's a different thing. Like, this is how long the franchise ran. And the level of, like, by the time you got to year 7, the fact that every first grader in the nation knew who this guy was, had a friend that dressed up for him as Halloween, had him on like a toy or a lunchbox or something, like is speaking to that power of this idea, which is why the movie works, which is why the movie, it doesn't feel like a stretch. It doesn't feel like advertising for New Line, which in a way it is. Like, it's like image rehab for New Line in a way, but it's like, it's still not that. Like, that's not what the movie is. And the movie is, you buy it because if you remember back during this time, this is all very true.
Yes. Well, and I mentioned Jason and Michael, and like my friends definitely knew them, but you're right. Freddy was on another level, and it had to do the simplest distinction there is that Freddy can talk to you, which Jason and Michael don't do, and that was part of what made Pinhead a little later on, kind of after Freddy hit a more special villain. But even by that standard, like Freddy he was Mr. Charisma. He was Mr. Put on a show, to the point that there is a scene in this movie that captures the Freddy Mania thing. There's a scene where Heather is on a talk show.
Yeah.
And they're asking her about, it's been 10 years since Nightmare on Elm Street. And is Freddy really dead? And well, of course, Freddy's dead. And she's anxious already because her son is having these nightmares. And then they're like, we have a surprise for you. And there's a slash in like a screen behind her. And all of a sudden, Robert Englund walks out in full Freddy regalia and just hams it up for a talk show audience that are going ape
and they love it.
Yeah, they're
which is how he appeared on many talk shows, which is how he appeared on the Arsenio Hall show. Like, it's like this. There's this real, and there's even a kill in one of the movies. That's that's a play on that, of like how ubiquitous he became. But it's so good, and I want to say my most controversial thing, because it's now like an hour into the podcast, so hopefully everyone's bought their books already.
Oh, we're not that far in.
I hope okay. Pause the podcast, go buy the Clown and Cornfield books at Influencer, and now I'm going to say the thing.
All right,
that's going to get you to try to return the books.
Adam's going to drop
I'm not
it.
a hot take guy. I'm not a hot take guy, but I watched this movie yesterday in preparation for this, and here's my hottest take. New Nightmare is better than all the Scream movies put together. I think it is. I think it does what the Scream movies purport to do, and this is coming from a guy who has been accused of writing like the Cloud of the Cornfield books as Scream fan fiction. I like the Scream movies just fine. I definitely didn't write fan fiction of them, but I like them a lot. I have a very similar story about the first Scream movie. I have the first Scream movie is a few years later. I still was sent screaming from the theater because I convinced my dad to bring me to that same exact theater, same exact screen. It was the big screen at the Islip Triplex with a middle aisle. And I ran screaming out of that after Drew Barrymore bought it. But I think this movie does the meta thing, has more ideas, has more to say about the horror genre and the people that consume it and the people that make it than Scream does, which is what the whole like idea of Scream is that, and that's my hottest take. I still like them very much. Don't burn your books yet, but I really do think that this movie is better at that than those movies are. That's my, and I'm not the first person to point out that this movie is clearly a dry run for Scream, like that this movie not being the world changing hit, like kind of allowed Scream to be like, almost like, let's do it again, but make it its own thing. Like, let's do slasher commentary, and you have the great Kevin Williamson script in the other one. But I really do believe that this is a more Wes Craven-y movie than the Scream movies are. You get his kind of, at times, high-handed philosophizing. Like, you get it like externalized when at the end of the movie Heather's kind of dragged into Freddy's hell, and it doesn't just look like, corridors and steam pipes like it usually does. It looks like Hellraiser 2. It looks like Hellbound. Like she arrives through Freddy's head, and there's a beautiful matte painting, and there's all this stuff in the background of like different Grecian myths and like all this stuff that Wes Craven, who is a very erudite man and very soft-spoken, elder statesman of horror at this point, all the stuff he liked putting in his scripts is like externalized in this like final scene, which is I think it's a great kind of meta movie in that way too. It is like the most Wes Craven movie in that way too. So there you go. There's my opinions.
It's so funny that you said it, because I was on Blue Sky last night, and I said that I was watching this movie, and I was talking to a friend about it, and I did say it is the most Wes Craven movie.
Nice.
It is absolutely everything that he had done in the horror genre from Last House on the Left up until then, distilled into. And I don't know that I agree about the Scream thing. I haven't thought about it that much. Yeah,
it's a very incendiary thing to say, and I'm very brave.
Well,
but
my thought was that I'm gonna have to have you back on and get Stephen Graham Jones to come on, and you two can debate.
Dr. Jones knows I'm right.
Dr. Jones might say you have a point, but I know he will go to bat for
this
Scream.
This is a man with insane opinions. Like, this is a man that's written 10,000 words at least on Cry Wolf and the virtues of it. Like, we can't. I love him dearly. I think he is the greatest living horror writer. But I think I got him on this one.
I'm supposed to talk to Steven in a few weeks, and this is definitely going to come up now. I have to know what he thinks. I don't
even know that I believe my own opinion, but I do think there's. I said the incendiary thing first, that it's better than all of them, but I do stand by it does the thing that they portend to do better than them. Is at least my sticking point.
I think that one strength that New Nightmare has that Scream is perhaps. I also love the Scream movies.
I'm not saying it to their detriment. I'm not saying it to their detriment. I think the first two are amazing. I think the first two are incredible. They're immaculate movies.
Yes, we are Scream fans here, but one thing I think that this movie has, as heavy-handed as it can be, and it can be because you literally have Wes Craven playing himself, explaining the lore of the movie to you in one scene. But Scream at least at first, is so focused on these are the rules. We're going to
Yeah.
explain the rules to you. And New Nightmare has a similar vein of commentary and satire running through it, but it is less about it's not focused on genre convention so much as
It's
it's
more about
focused
dream
on
logic. It's almost like it works within the internal logic of the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Like that's why I think I like it. That's why I think I prefer that to it. Like because I think I've told this little chestnut on a million podcasts. This is the anecdote I've said on a million podcasts where it's like Randy's rules in Scream are not correct. Like they do not map onto any real scope of horror movies and slasher movies specifically, like to a T. They don't really work, but they're a great storytelling device. They work within that film, but they're not great film commentary. If you know what I mean, like within the world of Scream, they work. And I think actually those become a little bit more refined, and I think in two that they handle a little better, like the idea of talking about sequels. But I just don't think those are right, and I think they've led to a lot of as savvy and smart and savvy as Scream is, it's led to this idea of like, well, if you know Scream well enough and you know the rules laid down in Scream, you're a real horror head, you're a real expert. Like, and it's like you can't. This is a fictional film. You can't base your like film theory discussions off of like something that Randy said. Like Randy's not real. That's Jamie Kennedy. He's got a podcast. Like that's not like that's where I prickle with the Scream films is that idea that they are this super sage view of horror films when they are not. They are a poppy, cute, post-ironic, getting towards the millennium, very 90s, like take on, oh, we can only do this movie if we do it at this certain remove at this certain where I do not feel that New Nightmare does that. I think New Nightmare is almost the opposite. New Nightmare is about Wes Craven's lofty ideas of like fireside storytelling and the idea of dreams and the idea of where do our anxieties and things come from. And it sets that up. And like you said, it's quote unquote heavy handed. That's your words, not my words, where Craven is the one delivering this to us. But then the movie's a lot more sly and a lot more subtle in certain things because you're like, well, what are the anxieties? The anxieties are, this plot-wise, the anxieties are motherhood and parenthood in general. And maybe it's because I'm like a big softie now and I'm a parent, where that resonated with me. But there's this whole other level of like, well, what are the real anxieties of this movie? What are the real anxieties that Wes Craven's working through? The anxieties are about movie making and about LA movie making specifically, and about there's like the 10 freeway is the villain of the movie, like the idea of like having to be in a limo and someone kind of sleazy wants to talk about your movies with you, like there are all these almost micro specific fears to these things where Scream's painting with as broad a Americana brush and as soap operatic a canvas as possible. And then this one it's called Wes Craven's New Nightmare for a reason. Like it's in the title. Like it is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And there's this whole other level of that the movie works on, I think, where it's like, it's not quite the player. It's not quite like that level of Hollywood satire, because there's almost no satire of Hollywood. The Hollywood stuff just happens. And it's like the business of how to make a movie. And then all the anxieties are just happen to be around that stuff. Like, and Heather Langenkamp in real life is married to a special effects guy. She has a stake in his company. She is a special effects person herself. Like this is a movie that is like so close to home. She met him. This is me reading Wikipedia. It's not like I knew this stuff beforehand, but like she met her husband at the wrap party to a Serpent in the Rainbow. This dude has. These are family stories in a way, and in such an endearing way, I find. And that is, and bringing it back to quote unquote the scares that shaped us. A lot of my, I think a lot of the best horror is like something that works as both broad and specific. Like what's a fear people have? Gross stuff, touching rotten corn, like mice, dead bodies, the dark, claustrophobia. And then like, well, what is, yeah, sure. Those are fears that most people have, but what is a specific fear? And what is a specific anxiety? And what is a specific, like, and that's how I write my books. That's how I think about horror. That's like how that's the kind of horror that resonates for me. And it's all so neatly exemplified in this movie that I saw 1 hour and 15 minutes of when I was 6. Like it's a nice. I'm completely rambling. I'm so out of my.
No. You're
I
totally.
do think I'm making some salient point that you can cut together.
You are. Well, this is not a podcast about Scream, but one point I wanted to make really quickly about Scream, and you were talking about Randy's rules and how they don't actually work. If the more you get into horror, the more you're like, wait, that's not actually what's going on here. Like the whole thing about final girls can't have sex is a rule that is broken by Black Christmas in 1974.
Yes, but it's like the B plot, or barely the B plot of the movie. It's like the A plot.
The thing about that I think people miss, because people do tend to latch on to those rules and the way that the film subverts those rules and think that it's gospel. But the thing that Scream is also trying to tell you is, yes, Randy has watched a lot of horror movies. Randy is also a dumb teenager who gets drunk and high in the middle of a killing spree.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Randy is not the prophet from on high who's going to tell you how this is going to go, and that's part of the point of Scream.
That's not an issue with the film. That's my issue with the general interpretation and the conversation, in the 30 years since the film. That is I do want to go on record there, and that I think the movie is plenty smart, and the movie is sly. I think the way that we've talked about it and the way that we've fetishized these movies, it's so interesting. It's so interesting that the Scream franchise has continued, and there's less of them than there are Freddy movies. But the Freddy movies all got in that 10-year period, and the Scream movies have just kept going posthumously for Craven into this age now where we meme everything to death and we waifu-fy every killer, and there is this interesting thing that the Scream movies have been able to do and have been able to contend with that Freddy has not been allowed to, because of, I'm guessing, rights problems. I'm guessing it's all Friday the 13th-esque squabbling over who came up with a hat, and I know New Line has its own bag of worms legally and stuff like that. But another thing that I found interesting about this movie, and I like talking about movies, but we seem to be talking about a lot of other external factors. What's interesting about this movie that I did not know until I started watching, I watched the Blu-ray, and there were a bunch of interviews with Craven, and I was like, oh man, he doesn't care. Like, he's just kind of spilling the tea on his reasoning for making the movie was if not purely, largely financial, in that his payment for New Nightmare, at least to hear him tell it, is that he got points on the sequels that he had been previously denied. He didn't have points on anything other than the first one, but he got shares in 2 through 6, because of making this movie. New Line cut him a side deal and was like, as part of your reimbursement, you can have a financial stake in these sequels that you had no kind of real creative stake in, which is, I find fascinating, because this is not, to me, you hear that story and you're like, paycheck movie.
Yeah.
But this is Wes Craven we're talking about. He's not making a paycheck movie. He's making a legit movie. He's making his most autobiographical film in a way, not just from the fact that he's in it, but it's all these other things that the movie's about. It's just so amazing to me that you can look at I don't know. He was so good. And his movies are so because I say that about this movie and about Scream. This wouldn't even be in my top 3 Wes Craven movies. Dude has such a deep bench of great movies. Even the ones that don't even 100% work for me, like Shocker, I still like it. There's still cool stuff in it. It's just wild to me, and it's a little disheartening to me and a little sad to me that we just don't really have directors like that. We don't really have franchises like that. We don't really have something you can really point to. I think like maybe the closest thing is Jordan Peele, but Jordan Peele, they're not making a bunch of Us sequels without him. You know what I mean? Like they're not like he's not that kind of Jordan Peele didn't like. Maybe he has put his name on stuff as a producer, but there's no like above the title Jordan Peele's Wishmaster. You know what I mean? Like there's no it's a positive and a negative because it's like these folks used to become franchises in themselves, or like filmmakers used to become franchises in themselves, and I think we're so obsessed with IP and we're so obsessed with this idea of development, and we're so obsessed with this idea of like the best ideas start with like development executives, not filmmakers, that it's like that they almost won't allow that to happen. You know, like I think Jordan Peele clearly has the chops to be like the next Wes Craven, and he'll keep making incredible films that are just as good as Wes Craven movies, but he'll never have that because of the mechanism of how movies are made. It doesn't feel like they will allow it to be Jordan Peele's Wishmaster. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You know, like, it's there's something a little bit nostalgic to me about this film too. And for those of us that don't, for those of us playing the home game that aren't just disgusting like us, like the Wishmaster is not a Wes Craven movie, right? They slapped his name on. It's I forget. It's the special effects guy. What's his name? Rob. Who directed? Oh my God, who directed Wishmaster? Cut this out. Make it sound like I knew
who directed Wishmaster. We're gonna find out.
Robert Kurtzman. Yeah, Robert Kurtzman directed Wishmaster, and it's it was released on in theaters and home video as Wes Craven Presents Wishmaster.
Yes.
But you know what I mean? Like maybe I'm talking out of my ass a little bit.
No.
People like that because I think Ty West is getting there, but I do think there is a different way that we relate to this stuff, fandom wise, and and culturally. Yeah.
Well, going back to something you were talking about in terms of anxieties and how that stuff plays into this movie, I want to talk a little more about Craven's sort of craft approach to this, but I want to go back to sort of the overarching thing first. And it is so interesting because Craven was always the erudite. I mean, like, Last House on the Left, a film that essentially blackballed him from making more horror movies for almost a decade, was based on an Ingmar Bergman.
He's the Virgin Springs, Virgin
Springs,
he's great at not only infusing his films with this kind of level of reading, but he's great at talking about them that way too. I think there's a tiny bit of, and as much hero worship as I have for him, I think there is a little bit of showmanship to him too. Like he's not Lloyd Kaufman, but he's savvy of how he talks about these things.
Yes.
There's a great book by Jason Zeineman called Shock Value.
Shock Value, great book. Yes.
One of the best books ever written on horror movies, I think.
Yes.
If not the best one. And his whole thesis of the books have kind of built around, they talk about a lot of the horror guys. They talk about Tobe Hooper, they talk about Wes Craven, they talk about John Carpenter. But the kind of hook of the book is Dan O'Bannon, is like kind of the hero character in the book.
Yeah.
But the thesis of the book is this idea of like this boom of horror only happened because it wasn't born out of a horror fandom. This class of filmmakers that was making movies all around the same time that kind of revolutionized and brought in the new horror were making movies because they were interested in making movies, and because they had other influences. It's like like Eugene Ionesco is like an influence for like Hooper, and it's not like Hooper was like, I'm gonna make the best Texas Chainsaw movie. It was like and it's a very interesting premise. Whether or not you agree with it, I think the book makes a very good case for it. And then at the center of it is kind of Dan O'Bannon as this kind of almost the closest thing to what we have now of like the fanboyishness of like
yes.
And I think it's a great book, and I think that's no one is that more true, and I think for no one is that more of almost a cultivated image than it is for Craven, because I think Craven is this bearded professorial type who makes movies where where irradiated monsters try to eat a baby,
Yes, yes,
it's like, but also that's that's the classic Sawney Bean. This is folklore.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
his hit would be his response, but it's still a
Well,
shocking and exploitative piece, which is why I think of the horror guys, I think that's probably why he's most my guy, because
yeah,
I like low things. I like, as we were just talking, why we talked about terror tunes for 10 minutes. I have no idea, but like, it's that idea of like, I do like that stuff, but I like talking about movies in this way. You know what I mean? Like, I think
yes.
that's why I have him as like my spirit guide in a way, because I think he's the guy that does that the best.
Well,
Um,
and the thing that's amazing about New Nightmare, we were talking about Scream, and we were talking about that sort of ironic detachment that is true of Scream, but is even more true of the slasher films that came in that post Scream boom,
oh yeah,
where everyone was trying to out Scream. But the thing about New Nightmare that I think speaks to your point about it sort of doing the same things better than Scream does is Craven is not really trying to be ironic or cynical about it.
no,
Craven is looking at this, he's looking at a career which at this point was 25 or so years
yeah,
from Last House on the Left, give or take. He's
yeah,
looking at this and looking back at everything he's done and going, so of everything I've done, the burned guy with the fedora is the thing that everyone is still talking about.
yeah,
Why?
yeah.
And it is this
It's a good answer
remarkable,
too.
yeah, and it was his effort to come up with an
Yeah,
answer, and he came up with, and it is a lofty answer of like, well, I tapped into something primal, which if you hear him talk about the genesis of Nightmare on Elm Street in the first place, he is
yeah,
thinking in terms of these primal forces of like, we don't really know why we dream. So what if we're dreaming for darker purposes than we realize? And then with New Nightmare, he's going, all right, so I came up with that. This is clearly, if not the best idea I've ever had, then at least the most pervasive and ubiquitous. What does that mean?
yeah.
Not just to the audience, because he does address what it means to the audience and to the fans, but he's like, what does that mean to me as a person who is trying to tell stories for a living?
Yeah.
And that's the
It would
that's
be
the
so
best
easy
part.
for
Yeah.
him to it would be so easy for him to let a little of that cynicism in too. Like, let a
Yeah.
little of that, like, I'm doing this for points on the sequels in. Like, and it's so great that he does it, because I think the
Yeah.
movie is so much better for it. The movie, if the movie were that acerbic take on Hollywood, like, and you never know. You never know why it is that way. Like, is he doing it, like, was there a draft where like like he wasn't as nice to Bob Shea? Like, is there a draft that he didn't attend the funeral to Heather Langenkamp's husband? Like, that's odd. Like, that's odd that he's there, but it's like there is that, like, you can only really work from the film you have, and I think it's so refreshing that it's not cynical. And I think, what to speak to what you were talking about before this, that this feels like almost like a greatest hits for Craven, and a career retrospective for Craven, because you have like you have like the people under the stairs type, like Kid in Peril stuff here too. Like, you have this all, like, this, like, kind of career retrospective, and how far he's come from that. Where, like, how far he came from Last House on the Left, grody, starting out in shooting adult movies, and all this, like, stuff, like this going from not Hollywood into being the most Hollywood beasts, and, like, into being the reason a studio exists. Like, they don't say it in the movie, but New Line is the house that Freddie
The
built.
house that Freddie built. Yeah.
Everyone talks about it that way, and it's not an exaggeration to say. But, like, in Bob Shea's office, there's, like, the pop art. There's, like, the Andy Warhol eyes,
Yeah.
image of Freddie, which is like, if that's set dressing, I'm betting that's set dressing, because I'm guessing the New Line offices were never that nice. Like, you have it, like, it's so bustling with people, and they're all very professional. And I was like, I doubt that's what New Line looked like. But I love that on Bob Shea's office they have that, like, he can't get away from, like, that's where it all started, guys. It's like framing your first dollar if you're a pizza joint. Like, it's so smart. And it's, yeah, it's just we're, like, talking about the ideas of the movie and not even the execution of the movie. I think it's not like it's not like it's Nightmare on Elm Street, in that it's a perfect film where, you wouldn't change a frame kind of thing. It's not, it has this kind of shagginess to it. It has this, there's better moments than others. There's parts where you can kind of see the seams of the early CGI. Like there's all this stuff that doesn't, on paper shouldn't work or shouldn't stand the test of time, but because the bones are so strong and because the ideas are so strong, none of that matters. Like it's just, you stop watching the movie and you're able to immediately talk about the movie in this way, is take away from it,
Well, and talking about the execution, one thing that struck me that I probably missed on earlier viewing, because my other thing with this movie that's funny is when I was 15, 16 and finally had my own cash and could go to the video store and rent stuff, I rented all of the Nightmares, but my video store didn't have New Nightmare for one reason or another, probably because it's the least popular. So I didn't see it until I was in my 20s. And this was my first time going back, which Adam is right. If you weren't a parent the first time you saw New Nightmare and then you see it again as a parent, it hits different.
Yeah, I bet I saw that stuff I bet I thought like that playground stuff was hokey. I bet I thought that stuff was hokey on all my viewings prior to this.
God.
And it doesn't feel hokey now.
No, it's harrowing now.
It feels very lived in too. It feels very like what Dad made it.
Yeah. Well, and in terms of execute, one thing that I noticed that I love is it is full of all of these nods to previous Nightmare films, and just these little visual gags that sort of clue you in. Like I think at one point Heather wakes up and she's basically wearing the same nightgown from like a
there's
previous.
That, and there's like the oatmeal stairs. There's all the gags like from Nightmare on Elm Street come back.
The tongue, way that we Freddy's would do tongue, them
now. Yeah, the tongue phone, but then you see the froth coming out of the holes in the phone, which is awesome. But like there's all these things, and it doesn't feel like the way you would do a legacy sequel now. It doesn't feel like Remember Berries. It doesn't feel like because they're so quickly done and not commented on, like Freddy's arm stretch, which is something he does in the first one when he like puts his arms out across the street and they like all this stuff almost feels like, well, that's just parts of like what makes a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And then there's all these other little touches that aren't gags that are repeated. Like my favorite gag in the movie is such a small thing, and it's only my favorite gag this time I watched it because I strained to even remember this part. John Saxon, for whatever reason, is one of Heather Langenkamp's best friends, which I believe that. But like, there's a great scene towards the end when we're breaking into the third act, which is I think the best piece of writing and the best piece of like little visual trickery in this movie is John Saxon stops responding to being John Saxon and will only respond to Heather as in character as Nancy, as being her dad.
Yes.
And there's a little visual thing where he turns around and the world is not like people are under like a spell. It's like, no, they're really going into like the dream world now, because there's a shot where John Saxon's subtly dressed one way, and then there's a shot where we get the reverse shot and he has his gun and his badge, and it's perfect. Like, that's so good. Like, I love that. Like, I love that bit, and it's a perfect little bit of Freddy dream logic, and it's not even Freddy related. It's the Freddy infecting the world and being like, no, you're in the third act of a Nightmare on Elm Street movie now, Nancy. You're not Heather anymore.
Yes,
which is so great. Yeah.
Well, my favorite that I noticed this time around was by the end of the film, like Adam said, you enter the dream world, and Heather's house in Los Angeles becomes Nancy's house from Nightmare on Elm Street, and she goes back into the original house. But one thing I don't know if this was, I would have to go back and watch again to figure it out. I don't know if it was a subtle change in the art direction and set design as the film goes on, or if it was just Craven working in different camera perspectives to make you realize this. But you start to see the front of her house more. You start to see the white picket fence in front of her house. You start to see rose bushes coming up this white picket fence. And the film, that's one of many subtle ways that the film slowly starts to shift toward Nightmare on Elm Street. And it speaks to the depth of Craven as a storyteller that he is seeding. And like you said, it's not like wink, wink. Hey, remember? Hey, this was in the last one. It's more just like, we are taking you someplace, and you're gonna understand when we get there where we are, and it's all gonna make sense. But in the meantime, this is just gonna maybe remind you of something you saw, and it might freak you out a little bit. It might not, and I love that.
Yeah, it's just really well made film. And again, and it's like it's one of those like where I watch it. It's another one of those movies where we all have these movies where because I saw it at such a young age and because it was so influential on me, because I kind of hold it on a pedestal, you kind of watch it and like whenever I watch a movie like that, at a few years remove, I try to kind of challenge it. I try to be like, this probably isn't really as good as I remember it being. And a lot of
Yeah,
the time, those movies fall down, and this one doesn't. And I think it speaks to that craftsmanship. Is that like I kind of watched it this time, not with my arms crossed because I always come to a movie with my arms open, but I watched it basically being like, try to not be six watching this, like,
yeah,
it's not like I get different things out of it as we've established, but I do think there's just something about it that like, no, it was just as good then, it's good now, it's just a good movie. Like,
yes,
yeah.
yes. So I want to, before we wrap up, I want to ask you something that's kind of been threaded through our whole conversation. Um, and it's something we talk about a lot in the horror world. And because I'm, like I said, I wasn't allowed to watch horror as a kid. I have a kid now. I want him to grow up in a world where it is safe for him to engage with horror stories at any age, uh, and not feel like they're forbidden. You write books for teenagers about teenagers. You write these young adult novels,
Yeah.
and like you said, there's no content warning. There's no like, you can't be too gory. You can't curse too
Oh,
much.
in
You can't.
Influencer, there's a content warning. In
Oh no, no, but I
Influencer,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
like you
yeah.
said, there's
Oh,
no
yeah,
like
there's no
rating.
limitations. Yeah, there's no
There's no,
limitations. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
They can't.
yeah.
They're not like, don't be
I think
too gory.
propriety and good taste is and
Yes,
responsibility. The responsibility is the word I use. I actually don't think propriety and good taste. I think good taste. Clearly, I don't have good taste. But I think, responsibility is the word I use
yes.
when I talk about writing YA in that
Yeah, well,
sense.
this is what I want to ask, because you also mentioned being a very young child and getting your dad to take you to movies that you would then run out of, but you kept coming back to
Yeah,
horror.
yeah,
Like it
yeah.
was not like they scared you away for good with Casey's death at the start of Scream. So with that like responsibility in mind, that sense of like knowing who you're writing for, and knowing how different age groups respond to horror. um what value do you place on the importance of horror for young people, like, because it clearly influenced your entire upbringing. So like, how do you see it now as someone who writes books for younger readers?
It's interesting because I'll get questions like, especially if I sell books at a convention, I'll have parents coming up with me and being like, well, is this okay for them? And they like point over at like an 11-year-old, and I'm like, yeah, if it were me when I was 11, probably, yeah, but I don't know your kid, and I don't know the way that you're raising them. I don't know like their kind of tolerance level, and it's this. My whole perspective on this hasn't really so much changed, but has been informed by having my own kid. Like, because I'm wearing a The Wicker Man shirt today. You kind of can't, like you said, your dad sheltered you from certain things, didn't want you to see them. My kid, like, even though I'm going to make those decisions when those decisions arise, like if she wants to watch this stuff or try to guide her in the right direction as a responsible adult and a responsible parent, my kid, to a certain extent, lives in the Munster house. Like, she can't really, like, there's gonna be times where I'm wearing horror t-shirts, and that time is going to be basically every day. So she asked me about it today. Like, she asked me about this shirt, and I like literally just like was like, she's on the potty. I'm just sitting there talking to her like about like, well, it's called The Wicker Man, and you know how in Wicked they burn that effigy of Elphaba at the beginning, like similar idea. Like, I like this, like, I'm trying to give her. She's almost 3. Like, trying to give her the context of this, but also like, am I going to show her Scream when my dad took me to Scream? Hell no. Like, I don't think probably not. But it's also, I think it's that idea of got to know your kid. You got to know what they can handle. And I think the silver lining to this is that there is so much more horror specifically for kids these days. I think there's a lot of middle grade horror. I think there's a lot of kiddie horror. Like I think there's like a lot of, you can look at Paranorman or any number of like Monster House, any number of horror films, horror adjacent things that are meant specifically for kids, that are meant for tweens, that are meant for teens. And you have that distinction that you didn't really have when we were kids. Like if you look back on the Goosebumps books and you look back on the Fear Street books and you look back on the Christopher Pike books, they're still playing in that PG area. They're still playing in that PG, maybe verging on PG-13 area. There's a wider swath. So if you were a kid like us, and I know that there are kind of two different horror fans. They're the horror fan that you were, that like this was verboten and you kind of geared up to it and then just like went full tilt at 15 as soon as you could. And then there are the ones like me that it's like fetal. Like, and I think they're like, that's kind of almost the main distinction in like people like us, like real, not real hard, not like that, not that, gatekeepery shit. Like, I just mean like the people that can't stop doing this.
Yes.
But but I think there is now, because we as kids had to reach for Stephen King and Clive Barker and Anne Rice and things that they're so clearly not for kids. That are not. It's not that it's a content thing. It's just that you're not the intended audience. And I like now that there is horror for every age and every stage, and there is going to be a way for me to kind of, if she wants to. I'm not going to be that. I'm not going to be the dad that's like, getting the kids like X-wing, call sign figured out, like before they express any kind of interest in Star Wars. Like it's like that. I don't want to do that with horror because frankly, selfishly, I want her to be into it. I don't want to be like pushing it on her. So I think you kind of have to. It's either in you or it isn't. It's the Mad Men line. Don Draper does I'm not going to stand here and tell you about Jesus. He either lives in your heart or he doesn't. I'm not going to stand here and talk to you about Freddy Krueger. He either lives in your heart or he doesn't. It's. Does that kind of answer your question? I like that there is the option for kids now. Things that are scaled to them.
Yes.
And that speak to them where they are.
Yes.
And that's why I get a lot of. I'll go to conventions. A lot of my friends are adult horror authors. Like, and a lot of the people that you see at conventions are all adult horror authors. I'm kind of like the one YA guy there. There's like YA conventions. I imagine I don't go to them, but I'm like the YA guy who's at the horror thing. I don't say I don't go to them. I don't get invited to them. We'll say that. But like, I'll have other authors ask me, and they don't mean it, but you could tell the way they think. They're like, when are you going to start writing adult horror again? Like it's a little bit of a, you're over there, you're writing this kiddie stuff. Like, what are you doing? Like, and I bristle so much at that. Like nothing gets me like in a fighting mood more than like, no, I'm so proud of my work. Like I just said, like I've written 15, 20 books, if you count the novellas, if you put all the short stories together, that many words published. Like, I think Climb the Cornfield 3 is my best book, like by a pretty wide margin. I think it's like, I point to it as like that and Influencer are like my, like, I think those are like me at like full speed, like my best books. And it's sad to me that there's not that they're not meant for adults. Like, you don't have to read them if you're adult. If you're not a YA person, that's fine. Ignore them. But like, craft wise and story wise and everything else, I think they're just better than all of my adult books. Like, and I think to view it that way as like, I write YA stuff, it's not like I'm writing, like it's not right. I'm writing any kind of lesser format. I'm writing with a specific audience in mind. And I also think there's a responsibility and it's an honor to get to do it, because I get to be a gateway guy for kids, to send them in that adult writer's way, even if that adult writer doesn't 100% vibe with what I'm doing. I don't know. That was rambling, but
No,
yeah,
that was a great answer, and I think that as we get to the Clown in the Cornfield movie, that you're going to be even more of a gateway guy, and like as a parent myself now, I appreciate that I can. I mean, like it's very funny that you said that about your Wicker Man shirt because I have a Friday the 13th shirt on today,
nice.
and my kid saw it hanging up in like our bathroom. He wandered in, it was hanging up, and he pointed at it, and I was like, "Oh, that's Jason." You'll learn all about Jason one day. You don't
You'll
have to
know
worry about
later.
you don't have to worry about Jason right now.
Yeah.
But like he has a little Dracula counting book that I got him that
Yeah.
he loves it, and he loves Hotel Transylvania and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, well when he gets a little older, I can be like, you know how you have Dracula in that? Well,
Yeah, Andy
here's
Warhol's Dracula. Just go
yes,
right to that.
absolutely, absolutely. We will do it. So yeah, it's I love your books. Your books make me remember stuff that I felt as a teenager, and I think that they're going to hit even more people in the coming months. And I'm excited to
Fingers
see how many
crossed.
more young readers latch on. Our guest has been Adam Cesare. Adam, before we let you go, will you let everyone know where they can find you online?
The internet.
The
I'm on
internet.
all. I'm on all. I don't care if these are sinking ships. I'll be the last one on these hellholes. Yeah. So yeah, you can find me on literally all of them. If they haven't closed, it's not Friendster, it's not MySpace. Like if they haven't closed in the last 10 years, you can find me on them. I like TikTok. I like that one because that's kind of the most fun one. I like Blue Sky is also just Twitter. It's basically Twitter. I just put all the
Yeah.
same stuff on there. Um, and Instagram. Instagram's a good one. I don't know. They all have but Instagram is kind of just TikTok now. But yeah, you can find me on all those. YouTube. I haven't done a long form YouTube video in a while, but I have plenty of old stuff for you to watch. And then just find me, and you can, if you want my books and you want them signed, and you're in the continental United States. I work with a local bookstore. You can get them from Amazon. You can get them from Barnes and Noble. I don't care. I'm agnostic in that way. I understand big business and I understand small business. But if you're cool and you want to support a local indie bookstore here in Pennsylvania, I stop by a bookstore once a week and I sign a bunch of books and then they mail them out. So if you want the Clown of the Cornfield books, if you want them signed, so you can show your friends in the parking lot of the movie theater, I can do that for you. And that link is everywhere. It's on my website. It's on all my social stuff. So
We will link to it in the show notes. Adam, it has been great talking to you. Thanks for being on the show.
thank you so much, Matthew.
Thanks once again to Adam Cesare for being on the show. Always fun to talk to him. Pick up those Clown in a Cornfield books. If you haven't read them already, they're great. The movie will be out in May. You want to be prepared. Pick up Adam's other books too. Influencer is the big thing he's pushing right now, but go to his back catalog. Go find all the Adam Cesare books. Adam's great, has a great mind for horror and for mixing up the familiar and the new. He's wonderful. We love his work here. If you want to keep track of everything that we have going on here at Scares That Shaped Us HQ, the best way to do that is to follow us on social media. Right now, most of our social media is going through Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social over there. Easy to find us. Most of our posting happens there. If I do anything fun like a giveaway, linking to things that our past guests have done or our current guests are doing or our future guests are doing, it's usually happening on Blue Sky. Follow us over there. We're still on Twitter at Scares Shaped Us, though it's very sparse at this point. We might shutter that soon. We're also on Facebook at The Scares That Shaped Us, and we are The Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube, if that is how you like to get your podcasts. We also have a website, thescaresthatshapedus.com. That is where you can find an archive of our episodes, links to our socials, and ways to contact me. Easiest way to do that, if you're wondering, is to email scaresthatshapedus@gmail.com. I read your emails. I'm happy to get your emails. If you have a comment, a suggestion, a question that you'd like to hear me talk about on the show for whatever reason, really anything, I'm happy to read your emails. Happy to have you guys out there supporting the show. That does it for us this week. We will be back next week, February 19th, with a brand new episode. Our guest will be Bram Stoker Award nominated author of The Spite House and Devils Kill Devils, Johnny Compton. We had a great time talking about Johnny's work and about a legendary short story by Robert Bloch called Sweets to the Sweet. Again, that will be out February 19th at noon Central. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.